Hello and a very warm welcome to the programme. We are being warned of a crisis in our natural world as populations of important wildlife plummet. So what role can technology play in tracking the damage and hopefully stopping it? This is Roundtable. Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. At a moment of crisis for our planet, it's vital to keep track of what is happening, and technology can play a part in this too. It can help, from tiny radio trackers on insects to data maps of the movements of birds and mammals.
Technology is playing an increasingly vital role in conservation and ecology research. The World Wildlife Fund for Nature estimates that up to 5 living species on Earth become extinct every day. So researchers are developing new technologies to capture the data and maybe persuade those in power to act. So we've seen orchid bees fitted with radio transmitters and albatrosses wearing trackers to map illegal fishing, as well as the use of drones and satellites. The animal tracking database MoveBank says it's gathering data from nearly 1,000 types of animal at more than 2 billion locations worldwide. Animals have been described as the Earth's sensors. But how useful will animal tracking technology be for helping our planet?
And we welcome to the Roundtable studio Brendan Godley, Professor of Conservation Science at the University of Exeter. Billy Heaney with me here too, a zoologist and wildlife presenter. We cross the Atlantic now to North Carolina and say hello to Roland Kays, head of the Biodiversity Research Lab at North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, and in Ohio, Gil Bohrer, a professor of environmental engineering at Ohio State University. Roland, let me come to you first, and this is a question for every single one of you. Why, other than thinking about the creatures themselves, should I really care about where a zebra goes in Botswana, a penguin goes in the Antarctic, or a polar bear goes in the frozen north, or not so frozen north these days? Why does it matter to me?
Well, I think a lot of people love these animals. So that's the first thing, is we do care about the animals, and we do want to find ways that the animals and the humans can exist together. And just knowing where they are and how they're responding to humans on the landscape is a big way to do that. Now, a lot of these animals are also playing important roles in what we call ecosystem function. So they're moving seeds around, they're recycling nutrients. They are the cogs in the wheel of our planet that keep the planet healthy, and we want to have a healthy planet for our own sake, if not also for the animals.
It's not so long ago, a few years, I think, perhaps you've updated it since, so that you put radio transmitters on bees, because you were talking about pollination there. What does that tell you?
Well, in that case, we were wondering how far can these bees move with the pollen? Because, of course, the pollen is what the plants need to make the fruit, and we like to eat the fruit as well. And that movement is super critical. And if there's barriers to that movement, then you're not going to get that pollination. You're not going to get the regrowth of the plants. And so just understanding how far these bees were moving and if they were able to cross various barriers was really important for understanding the ecology of those plants in addition to the bees themselves.
And one of them flew across the Panama Canal, as I understand it, and obviously made it back. Otherwise, you wouldn't know. Gil, let me come to you on this one. You pull a lot of this data together at MoveBank. What have you learned about what we are doing to our planet from these creatures?
So the interest in identifying pattern, if we know where the animals go and if we can identify change, we can then try and explain why did it change. For example, with zebras in Botswana, we show that on El Nino year, the vegetation doesn't green up fast enough in the season, and then zebras that are going very long distance to find water are failing the migration, which doesn't only tell us about the conservation of zebra, but also tells us about the effect of the El Nino on the vegetation status and how that interacts with the animals.
And that should help us change our behavior in certain ways, do you think?
I think so. There are studies in the Arctic that have been helping to log the data, which showing the human impact on animal movement. So we actually learn the consequences of our actions in ways that wouldn't be so obvious. So the way caribous are moving are very affected by roads and by seismic lines, basically cuts to the vegetation, and they are affecting where caribou are going. So it shows us that very small impacts that we have on vegetation in the Arctic actually change the way animals move and interact with the environment.
If you like, Brendan, I'll come to you first of all because you were the teacher, he was the pupil. I'll go to the pupil in just a moment. You've been working with a lot of sea creatures down in Cornwall.
I have, yeah.
We'll talk about that. But are we here effectively talking about animal detectives, even if they don't know it?
Yes, and actually there are some serendipitous findings that are coming from animal tracking. So, for instance, there's been a recent study where devices that were on seabirds were able to detect the radars of illegal fishing boats and know where they were. And also...
tell us a bit more about that, because I've read this story. I was fascinated. These were albatross, right?
Yes, and then out in the open ocean, and they're able to pick up the radar of vessels which were dark vessels, not being able to be
These are the ones that
tracked.
hadn't got their radar switched on, and if they haven't got the radar switched on, they're up to no good.
Likely. And so certainly that's a perfect example of animal detectives. Another important thing which came out of Dr. David March's work in the University of Exeter recently was mapping the availability of tracking data sets with the oceanographic buoys and that are set to log the temperature, the salinity, etc. of the ocean. And he was able to show that there are areas where animals might be subject to tracking, which are cold spots for the oceanographic data. And so animals, we wouldn't be sending them specifically as drones, but if animals were being tracked in polar seas or shallow seas, they may be able to send us oceanographic data, which would help inform high-resolution climate models more effectively.
Gil was talking about caribou and zebra in Botswana. Do you think this is particularly relevant to those sort of cold spots that you're talking about, which would more often than not be in the ocean rather than on land?
Yeah, well, and specifically in shallow coastal seas and also in sometimes in specific countries, oceanographic buoys aren't quite as welcome as others. And so where animals are free to go wherever they please. And so there's great information to be derived in that regard.
And pollution, you were telling me beforehand, you were reading about pigeons in California.
Yeah, there was a study done in 2006 in California called the Pigeon Blog, where they put these transmitters and these devices on homing pigeons and were sent off, kind of like the canary sort of kind of study. And in lifetime, they were communicating to a Google server with sort of carbon monoxide levels and nitrogen oxide and stuff like that. That was getting fed back to a feeder, so you could see sort of what was going on in the atmosphere with regards to pollution levels and stuff like that.
You've spent a lot of your time down in the west of England. Yep.
Yep.
Studying wildlife, mostly sea wildlife, I think. Is there anything that you've learned that has absolutely astonished you?
Well, I think with marine megafauna, it's everyone loves a dolphin or a shark or a turtle, and there's a lot of wildlife tourism and stuff like that. And a lot of the work that I was looking into is, we're very lucky where I've studied and where I've worked that we've got these sort of populations of wildlife right on our doorstep that are very easy to view and easy to go and see at the weekend. But there's one thing then from what we found is obviously then the more we look at them, the more we're coming into contact with them. There's scope for us to have detrimental impacts on their life history and their behavior as well. So we were using different sort of cameras and people-counted technology to look at the potential for wildlife disturbance in an area in North Cornwall, and we did find that they were being disturbed.
Okay, well, we'll get on to that in a little bit more detail, but we've established that every one of you thinks that this is vital, and you're learning new stuff every day. So let me come back to you, Roland, first, and then you, Gil. How far have we come? I think it was 2010, Roland, you did your first bee study. How far have we come since then, in terms of the miniaturization, the ability to put it onto these creatures without harming them?
Yeah, well, so we've come a long way. And I think back even before the bees, the first ever tracking study I did, I had no GPS even that I could carry around in my hand. And so I had to use a compass and count my steps just to figure out where I was in the rainforest. And now we've really had this GPS revolution where we can put these GPS units, they've gotten small enough that we can attach them to the animals with having minimal or no effect. And they can record the location of those animals all, sometimes potentially even throughout their lives. And so getting those smaller, and then also the other thing that's really been key is the solar panels. So solar technology has improved steadily over the years. And now if you have a bird that likes to sit in the sunlight, you can put a solar device on there and it'll basically power the GPS forever, for the lifetime of that bird. And we're getting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of records right now from a bald eagle that's roaming all over the eastern United States that I would have no ability to follow if I was like on the ground running around with an antenna. So this combination of getting better GPS, smaller technology, combined with the solar panels has really completely changed our ability to see not just a couple points of, oh, the animal is here and here, but exactly how they're moving in between. And that's really been a breakthrough.
Extraordinary. I mean, is there a major concern? Billy mentioned it here, that you must not disturb the wildlife. And yet, in doing this, on a more detailed basis, that inevitably is going to become a bigger problem. What do you say to that? Anybody?
Yeah,
Roland, you first, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, whenever you're a zoologist catching an animal and working with an animal, you know, the safety of that animal is of chief concern, because I love that animal, and also you don't want your scientific results to be screwed up because of some giant device you put on the animal. So we're very careful. We have certain limits, and every species can be a little bit different, but we really want to minimize or have no impact. And so that's also been a critical part about the tags getting smaller. Is first of all, we have less impact on the species, and second of all, there are other species that are still, you know, too small to study, that now as they get smaller and smaller, we can study them for the first time.
Okay, Gil, I'll come to you in just a moment, but Brendan, you wanted to say something.
Yeah. Well, just that we are getting more and more data, and so the next revolution is probably pointing towards MoveBank in the fact that we've getting lots and lots of data, but it's integrating the data and having the power to synthesize these data sets. And that's one of the great assets of the MoveBank project. Other initiatives have been set up around the world, but MoveBank is now the biggest and most.
Well, say you want to address something to Gil.
No. So I just think it would be good for you to outline how MoveBank works, because I think it's an exemplar in this field.
Right, so MoveBank is a database operated by the Max Planck Institute. It is collecting animal movement data from whoever wants to provide it. It provides tools that allow you to track, to live feed your tracking data, but it also gives you tool to process already accumulated data into the database, clean it, quality control it. I think the latest developments in MoveBank is to provide the additional information about the environment. So I think one of the big revolutions in animal tracking beyond the device technology is the database technology. So what do you do with that tracking? So we are working now on an Arctic animal movement database, with inviting everyone that has anything that moved in the Arctic to be on a collective database. So you can learn beyond study of typically one species or two species or one population. You can have like pan-Arctic studies of multi-population across the different trophic levels. We are providing, there are many additional databases, not specifically for animal movement, for satellite data, weather reanalysis data, ocean reanalysis data. So we are providing tools to bring the information from those data sets into MoveBank and annotate it with your animal movement, so you can put the movement and the environment together at the same data set. And I think the next generation of super exciting things that can happen is that there will be feedback from the animal tag. So from data collected on animal tag in databases such as MoveBank or the ocean database like OTN and ATN, back to the large environmental data sets of ocean currents, wind velocities, ocean salinity profiles, and so on. Some of it is already happening.
It's all very interesting, but it has to be used by somebody who knows what they're doing. Is this the sort of stuff, Billy, that you would find useful?
Would find useful. With sort of regards to what I was doing, I wasn't doing actually using satellite trackers per se. I was using photography and video techniques to track animals and their movements that way. So I was using pictures a lot of the time to look at abundances and sort of the number of animals in one place in the same fixed location over time in the same area through multi-annual cycles. And that's one good thing about what's happening now with tags, is because they're getting smaller, battery life's getting better. One one thing that's quite exciting is we can get annual cycles and even multi-annual cycles to get these life histories of these animals. So we can see what they're doing across a year or over multiple years to see where they're going, where they're reproducing, where they're feeding. And it's all those things that are really exciting, because then we know where those important areas are so that we can then protect those areas and manage them better.
Can I very quickly, Brian, I know you want to come in. Do you do this out of the love for the animals per se, or do you do it perhaps with an eye on the future for humankind?
Well, as an animal lover, obviously I want to help protect these species because I'm obsessed, or passionate, but it's a borderline obsession with the natural world that I want to be out there and I want to do it. But what I also equally love doing is taking people that I know to go see wildlife. And if there's no wildlife for them to see, then one of my pastimes of taking people out to observe wildlife, educate them about them, well, that's gone, because there won't be anything there for them to see.
But do you think perhaps you might be able to look at grey seals, is it?
That's what I studied as a postgrad, yeah.
Okay, let's say you were looking at grey seals and you saw something unusual about what they were doing.
Yep.
And that was followed by some kind of cataclysmic natural event, let's say a weather pattern in the southwest of England. And you could put the two and two together and you could say, actually, if you stop doing that, then these things might not happen. So it's a symbiotic relationship to that extent. Do you find that exciting?
Well, I do, and as well.
I'm probably oversimplifying, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, but also I think as well as these sort of high-tech data integration things which can tell us about big patterns in the world, at the other end, people are very interested in wildlife, and these interfaces, we started very early with sea turtles on seaturtle.org, a website where when you start tracking your satellite, with the satellite, you start tracking the turtle. Every day the map gets updated and schools can adopt the animal and can follow it. So I've, for instance, shown school children in Gabon the routes of the leatherback turtle from their beach all the way to South America, and they can follow it live.
And back again?
We've not managed to get the complete loop with the leatherbacks.
But perhaps one day...
One day we might.
I don't know how long this journey might take, but you could have a fifth grader, a 10-year-old, who signs a name on the back of the turtle and then comes to the beach 2 years later to welcome it back.
Well, yep. Ideally, they could see it going and then know it was coming back.
And
so I think these technologies have got a great way of linking the love of animals, but with the sort of intrinsic interest of the phenomenon of migration, but with many different kinds of public.
Can they? This is for you to in the United States, but Billy, you also. Do you believe that animals can teach us about things that are going to happen before we know it ourselves? I'm thinking that perhaps if you saw them react in a particular way, you might know that an earthquake was coming. We know that animals in forest fires sense that something awful is going to happen before we know it. And that could be of a great advantage. I don't know whether it's Roland or Gil who wants to start that one, but Roland, you're nodding ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so this is a really interesting question, right? Do animals have some other senses, or are they just able to use the senses that they have to understand the world in a way that we cannot? And can we use that to our advantage? And I would say we're just now getting to the point where we can get enough data to start to ask that question. Because if you're just getting one data point a day or something like that, it's just, you don't know what the animal's doing well enough to find those kinds of relationships. But now they're able to get data every few minutes, sometimes every seconds, adding some of these other sensors about the animal's activity or about the environment, that we're starting to be able to ask that question. And I know there's a couple studies that aren't quite out yet that are finding some really exciting things about how animals might be able to predict natural disasters by a meaningful enough gap that they could give us a serious warning and help us save some lives.
Well, you will come on the programme and tell us all about that as soon as you get the heads up. We don't want anybody else to get the story first. Have you noticed a pattern here, Gil?
Yeah, I actually want to point out to much more mundane, but I think it'll be much more common way of forecasting. So if you think of regular weather forecasting, it's based on balloons that are launched from every airport in the world twice a day. And the airports tend to be in very specific area. We are very short on data over mountains. We are very short on data in some countries. They don't have a lot of airports, or they don't have money to launch the balloons. We are very short, as been mentioned in this program, on data in specific areas in the ocean. And especially in the ocean, there is data that's coming off animal tracks that incorporated in those collective data sets of everything that's been collected and then used to launch the reanalysis models, and the reanalysis models are the basic input used in every weather forecast. So in a way, we are already on the verge of incorporating animal observed data in our regular weather forecast to really improve the forecast specifically of an area where are very sparse with observation.
And of course, they have incredible sensitivities that we don't know 1/10 of at the moment. Let me tell you a little story. Many years ago, as I was a reporter working in the States, I went down to the Florida Keys, and there were some dolphins there that were being used to help autistic children.
Right.
You know, if the children played with the dolphins, then they would do some homework, and it encouraged them to do that. The mother of one of these children went in the water, and they were very boisterous. The dolphin went up to her on its tail, so it was pretty much upright, and went down on its tail, up with its head, emitting that dolphin noise, and could sense that she was very badly affected by cancer, and then just went up and just sat with her gently. They could tell by emitting sonar that she had something inside her that other people couldn't see. And we don't know 1/10 of it, do we?
No, undoubtedly, their animals have super senses that maybe we've lost or we don't know we still have. But, you know, for instance, the sea turtles as an example, I'm a sea turtle guy, so I'm going to talk about sea turtles. They actually, at North Carolina University, there's a guy called Ken Lohman who's been working for a number of years, and the baby turtles are able to detect very minor changes in the geomagnetic fields, and undoubtedly that's part of what sea turtles use to navigate around in the ocean, to find their way back to their beach of origin or to find their way back to their foraging area. It's not the whole story.
We could use all of these to our advantage, as well as hoping to protect them for their own sake as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So they can tell us something, and with this new technology, it's something that I touched on earlier. And an interesting study that I thought was fantastic was to do with spoon-billed sandpipers, where they nearly went extinct. They were down to a handful of individuals. But with technology, we were able to find out where they were going so that we can then protect those areas and basically save a species. But without the knowing of what was going on, where they were going, we wouldn't have been able to do that.
What's the next step? You have a think about where you would like it to go, both of you. And I just want to ask you, Roland, specifically about the Icarus project. And that is something I know you're very enthusiastic about. So explain what it is, and it involves the International Space Station.
Yeah, well, so this is a new technology that's working on the trend towards getting smaller transmitters, which is what we need to be able to track more species that we can't track now, and to have less impact on species that we do track. And the idea is that this International Space Station is a low Earth orbit satellite, so it's closer to the ground, so it takes less energy to get a signal up to it. So by having this antenna on the space station, we can have GPS transmitters all throughout the world on animals that are very small, very low power, are able to collect the locations with GPS, and then they know the orbit of the space station. So when they know the space station is about to come overhead, they turn on and they make a connection with it. They send the data up, and then they turn back off again to save it.
And this could be on creatures that weigh as little as I've read 100 grams. Now that's what, like half a mouse or something like that.
Well, it's a little bigger than that. It depends on the mouse. Half a rat, maybe. It's the key. So the transmitters we have now are 5 grams, and usually you want that to be 3 to 5% of the body weight. You don't want it to be too heavy for an animal. So that's sort of where we're at right now. But this is the first generation tag, and we're definitely looking towards getting this to be smaller. The dream is to have a 1 gram tag that would collect GPS and would send it, no matter where you are in the globe, back to the database.
And this is going to be fantastic information for you at MoveBank, Gil, isn't it?
Yes. So already Icarus data will integrate automatically with MoveBank. So if the user allows it, they can have their animals streaming through MoveBank to have a live view of where they are, and they can link it with the environmental data coming from satellite data sets to know what's going on that place.
And I ask for your thoughts on the future, what you'd like to see.
I would just point out that while the kind of applied research we are doing is very important, we should also do blue skies research. Just for pure inquisitiveness, we should find out stuff, because we don't know where the benefits will come from just shooting for blue skies and finding out things we don't know.
Okay. When do you think this new announcement, this fantastic breakthrough is going to be, Roland? You can tell me on air, but just tell me the details later.
It's my colleague's project, so I'm not super tuned in on exactly where they're at. I know they're revising manuscripts, so you'll have to check in with him for that.
Okay, well, you check in with him since you know him, and then you check in with us if you don't mind.
Sure.
It's
sure.
fascinating, absolutely amazing. Thank you very, very much indeed. Are you going back to the leatherback turtles, wasn't it, in Gil Bohrer last time?
Hopefully soon, but in the meantime, I've got some essays to mark.
and it's grey seals in the West Country.
Yes, via a quick trip up to Scotland tomorrow.
To see family or to see animals?
To go find some animals up a mountain, hopefully.
What a wonderful life. Not in this weather. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much to you, both of you in the United States, and thank you for coming in.
Thank you very
The
much.
Master and the Apprentice. Thank you. And thank you very much for watching this edition of Roundtable. From me, David Foster, from the team. We hope to have your company next time. Until then, goodbye.